All right, let's jump right in. We're looking at the absolute pressure cooker of the Russia-Ukraine peace talks.
It's intense.
Our sources reveal this flurry of, well, multi-layered diplomatic maneuvers, all driven by a really tight deadline and a very controversial U.S. peace draft.
And if you want to understand the speed of all this, you really have to look at the clock. The whole dynamic is being driven by President Donald Trump's determination to get a settlement.
Right.
He first set this incredibly hard deadline for Kyiv to accept a plan before Thanksgiving. Now that date slipped, but his stated mission is still to deliver peace before the end of the year. That's the primary driver here.
So you have these two completely different diplomatic tracks just colliding. On one side, you've got the U.S. pushing hard for what they're calling a swift settlement.
Which is, diplomatic language for Ukraine needing to be realistic.
And realistic means?
It translates directly into the painful reality of potentially ceding significant territory. So facing this, Kyiv and his core European allies are scrambling.
They're running a counter-strategy.
A very sophisticated one. They're aiming for what they call a dignified peace. One that respects Ukraine's independence and, avoids a deal that just rewards Russian aggression. The core tension you're seeing is a battle between diplomatic speed and national sovereignty.
Okay, so let's unpack this U.S. proposal. It's the centerpiece of the pressure. It started as this 28-point draft framework.
Right, developed by Trump's envoys. We're talking Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. And critically, we know they were consulting with Russian officials while they were drafting it.
And the president himself kind of played it down, called it just a map or a concept.
He did, but the leaked details were immediately startling. The framework was instantly controversial because it appeared to strongly favor Moscow's long-standing demands.
So if we break it down, what are the core components?
It really boils down to two things. Huge territorial concessions and very severe military restrictions.
Let's start with the land. What specifically was Ukraine being asked to confirm?
Well, point 21 required Ukraine to essentially confirm Russia's annexations. That means recognizing Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk as de facto Russian territory.
And it didn't stop there.
No. On top of that, the plan proposed freezing the battle lines in Kherson and Zaporizhia right where they are along the active front. It would effectively cement Russia's gains there.
So it feels like the plan was designed to permanently neuter Ukraine's military, not just settle the border. What were the most restrictive military demands in that document?
They were aimed at crippling any future defense capability. Point 7 demanded Ukraine completely renounce any future NATO membership, period.
And the army size?
Even more controversial, maybe. Point 6 capped Ukraine's total army size at just 600,000 troops. That's a massive restriction for a country that's, fighting for its very survival.
But the U.S. is also trying to sell this as a robust agreement, right? Offering itself up as the ultimate monitor. What were the proposed implementation mechanisms?
To manage compliance, you had point 27 proposing the creation of a peace council, which would be headed by President Trump himself.
Interesting. And what about incentives for Russia?
The deal had clear incentives to make it palatable. For instance, point 13 called for Russia to rejoin the G8, which, became the G7 after they were kicked out in 2014.
And the frozen assets?
Point 14 suggested using those frozen Russian assets to fund the rebuilding of Ukraine.
This is where that context from the sources is so vital. We heard Russia welcomed the draft, but the Reuters investigation showed a much deeper alignment.
That's the key nugget for you to hold on to. That investigation found that many clauses in this 28-point U.S. draft were lifted directly from a Russian 2025 non-paper.
And a non-paper is basically a wish list, right?
Exactly. It's an unofficial, non-binding proposal circulated in early negotiations. The fact that the U.S. proposal mirrored so much of Moscow's negotiating position, down to tactical clauses, explains why the Kremlin was so quick to say that Trump's new strategy corresponds in many ways to our vision.
And that strong alignment with Russia is why the expert analysis was so brutal. Calling it a hot mess seems almost polite.
Oh, absolutely. Analysts across major Western think tanks were pretty unified in their criticism. They found the framework unrealistic, imbalanced, and politically untenable.
The core problem being?
The core problem is that it fundamentally cuts across Western principles. It forces territorial cessions and rewards military aggression. The consensus was clear. In its original form, this draft heavily favored Moscow.
So Kyiv is faced with this proposal that looks completely imbalanced. They can't just say no because they risk losing crucial U.S. support. They had to create an alternative.
Exactly. President Zelensky had to walk a very tight line. He said he would work on the points, but he kept insisting on a dignified peace, stressing terms that respect Ukraine's independence.
And this is where the living structure comes in.
That's right. To manage the pressure, Kiev developed this three-track diplomatic strategy, 3 concurrent documents, all coordinated with their European allies.
Okay, walk us through those 3 tracks.
The first track is the framework document. This is the core peace plan itself. Kyiv took that US-Russian 28-point draft and, working with European partners, they revised it down to 20 points. Zelensky called it a framework that keeps evolving.
Emphasizing that it had to reflect more than just US interests.
Precisely. The interests of Ukraine, Europe, and the wider world, not just the US election cycle.
And the second document gets at that existential issue for them, future defense.
Security guarantees are absolutely central here. Since the US side has openly said it's not yet ready to see Ukraine in NATO, Kyiv is pushing for something almost as robust.
Article 5-like guarantees.
Exactly. Article 5-like. A promise from a coalition of the willing, so key US and European states, which, crucially, must be approved by the US Congress. They're prioritizing air defense and strict sanctions that would kick in immediately.
So they're trying to get the security benefits of the NATO treaty.
Without needing full NATO membership right now. That's the calculation. And the third document is simply reconstruction. Long-term planning, ready to kick in once a ceasefire is actually in place.
Now, this is where Europe played a huge role in creating diplomatic leverage for Ukraine. They didn't just support Kyiv's changes.
No, it was a critical, direct intervention. Leaders from the UK, France, and Germany published their own 28-point counterproposal. They were essentially challenging the US position out in the open.
And the differences were stark.
Very stark. Their plan completely scrapped any demand for forced land cessions. It capped Ukraine's army at 800,000, not the 600,000 in the US draft. And critically, it left the door open for future NATO and EU membership discussions.
The message from the continent, especially Brussels, seemed pretty unmistakable.
The EU Commission president made it very clear, flatly rejecting any deal that involved carving up Europe's borders. This European unity was crucial.
And Zelensky used that momentum.
He did. He held urgent video talks with those 30 supporting nations, the coalition of the willing, to coordinate their positions so they wouldn't be boxed in by the demands coming out of the Trump administration.
But we can't let these diplomatic documents just float in the ether, can we? They're constantly being shaped by the brutal reality on the ground in 2025.
Absolutely. The conflict didn't slow down for the talks, it escalated dramatically.
The numbers are pretty alarming. We saw this immense increase, over 26,500 battle events in just 11 months.
That's a 53% increase year over year. Russian forces have seized about 200 settlements, and they're driven primarily by the need to capture the rest of the Donetsk region.
And they're focused on one area in particular.
They are the tactically significant Pokrovsk-Myrnorad agglomeration. For context, this is a dense urban cluster.
That sits right on the main supply routes.
Exactly. Capturing it is the key to securing all of Donetsk. The military reality forcing Kyiv's hand in these talks is Russia's continued exploitation of Ukraine's acute shortage of infantry.
And the asymmetrical air war is also escalating, which makes the security guarantees paramount.
Russia ramped up its drone strikes by nearly 150% year over year. That led to a 30% increase in strikes that killed or injured civilians, over 2,000 civilian deaths recorded.
But on the flip side, Ukraine has also escalated its own counter-campaign.
They have, using long-range drones, particularly targeting Russian oil infrastructure. And this is having a verified economic impact. It's led to a 20% reduction in Russian oil output. It's a continuous, punishing cycle designed to put pressure on Moscow's ability to finance the war.
And amidst all this, the political pressure from Washington is just immense. President Trump was publicly frustrated. He said, I have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed.
That President Zelensky hasn't yet read the peace proposal.
Right. And that ties directly into the other U.S. pressure point, corruption.
Donald Trump Jr. suggested his father might just walk away from the talks entirely.
Citing repeated allegations of corruption in Ukraine, he specifically mentioned the resignation of top aide Andriy Yermak after an anti-corruption raid.
Which all feeds right into Trump's insistence on holding immediate elections. He publicly asked why Ukraine hadn't held polls, saying, they talk about a democracy, but it gets to a point where it's not a democracy anymore. And this raises a critical constitutional question for you to consider. Zelensky's 5-year term technically ended in May 2024.
But Ukraine's constitution forbids elections under martial law.
It explicitly forbids them. And martial law has been in effect since 2022. Zelensky has laid out a clear condition for any elections. Security must be provided against Russian drone and missile attacks, which would require massive U.S. and European assistance.
So it's not a political refusal, it's a security dilemma.
It's a security dilemma.
So we have the US deadline creating this intense speed, Europe building a political firewall, the battlefield escalating, all converging on these talks. According to Trump's outgoing envoy, a deal is really close, but what are the final two critical sticking points?
The two core issues that remain unresolved are the future status of the Donbas region and the fate of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine is in an unenviable position. They have to engage with the U.S. draft to prevent a complete collapse of U.S. support.
But they can't let the final deal be a total capitulation.
Exactly. A deal that just validates Russian aggression. These negotiations are balancing on a nice edge.
Before we wrap up, there's one really surprising factual nugget from the sources. It highlights just how complex the motivation for fighting in the East is, far beyond ideology.
Yeah, we always talk about Russia needing to conquer Donbas for political goals, but there's an incredibly practical reason driving the battle for that Slavyansk-Kramatorsk urban agglomeration.
And what is it?
What's fascinating here is that the drive to capture the rest of the Donbas is, in part, about basic necessities. Russian authorities have been struggling for years to alleviate severe, long-running shortages of running water in the Donetsk city urban sprawl.
Because the water sources aren't in the territory they hold.
Exactly. The crucial water sources, the key reservoirs and pumping stations, remain in the Ukraine-held part of the region.
Wow. So the military push to capture that industrial belt isn't just about political justification or mineral rights. It's about providing running water to 1 million residents.
It illustrates that sometimes this huge geopolitical conflict is rooted in core infrastructure and, basic human needs. That necessity providing water may ultimately determine the desperation and thus the aggression in the battle for that fortress built.
Which could dictate whether Ukraine succumbs to these demands.
It could. What stands out to you is that the battle for sovereignty can sometimes simply be the battle for a clean glass of water. Something for you to consider as these tense negotiations continue in the shadow of war.